I don't mean this to be offensive, but I mean, you're a very qualified guy. You guys go after gangsters, murderers, the rapists, a lot. Wouldn't you rather do that instead of just ticketing people for honking?
As you can clearly see, she wasn't ticketed.
Well, almost ticketed, right? I mean, we've seen this before. We've seen this a few times, but either way, though, isn't it like, wouldn't you prefer to go out there after those bad guys and potentially ticket people for honking?
This conversation can go for hours upon hours to give you information as to what effects a traffic stop does have for whatever reason. So at this point, I am going to cut the conversation off.
City started with Rebel News here, and today we're back at Calgary's Rally for Freedom. Now, recently, what we've seen is an injunction placed on these guys and protesting throughout the city. This was granted by no other than the City of Calgary itself, led by Mayor Jody Gondek. And as you can see behind me, the protesters are continuing to come out here in force, and in an effort to alleviate some of the issues caused by the injunction, they are protesting directly on City Hall property, which does not count as a park. Although, even though this doesn't count as a park, the fact remains that people are still not allowed to honk within the city in such a manner that would be considered intruding or too loud or otherwise deemed unnecessary by Calgary police. So the protest is still going on, the injunction is still going on, but notably, we should add that yesterday there was a protest or a parade, whatever you want to call it, that took place in downtown Calgary, and it was led by the mayor herself. And the reason why it was apparently allowed, according to the police on scene.
So if you apply for the permit and it's enforced, then it actually supersedes the injunction.
And that was brought by our new Calgary reporter Celine, who was on the scene quickly to ask police about why this double standard is being allowed. And what we found out is you can apply for a permit to have one of these protests at a park or wherever else you want it to be. However, these have to go through the city. And who runs the city? Calgary Mayor Jody Gondek, who was allowed to have her protest, but condemned the other protest. She was the one who basically put forth the charge towards this injunction, and now she's using it to give benefit to her political partners. Essentially, we don't have protesting here anymore. We have things that are allowed to be done by the government and things that aren't allowed to be done by the government. And more often than not, protests like this that are advocating for civil liberties and freedom are going to be put on the ladder, targeted by our government and our mayor, Jody Gondek, for their opposition to government mandates that have been imposed on us over the last 2 years.
Well, the police, they attacked a independent journalist, to be blunt, and now I'm banned from going to rallies until trial or they drop the charges. It's literally selective enforcement. They're openly, selectively enforcing this injunction, and the injunction doesn't specifically say anything about freedom protests or protests like this. It's just an injunction that blanket applies to parks. So the fact that they're selectively enforcing it really makes me sad, honestly, and it's illegal, honestly.
Now, recently, those at the Democracy Fund have filed a challenging against this injunction, which includes a few individuals who are taking the City of Calgary to court over what they describe as something that would breach their civil liberties, their Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Protest lawsuit is where you have to go to help these guys and other Canadians here in the City of Calgary against this injunction, limiting the ability of people to peacefully protest. And don't forget, donations would provide you with a charitable tax receipt. So we're going to talk to some of these guys today and find out how they feel about this injunction and their right to peacefully protest being infringed on. Recently, we've seen this injunction taking place affecting the ability for Calgarians to peacefully protest. What do you think about this injunction that's recently been placed on you guys?
Yeah, well, that's illegal.
Well, I think it's really unfair because legally we have the right to protest and now we're being stopped. So it's not very democratic process, right?
Can I swear? It's bull. Like, it's complete bull. You know, they're using it towards trying to shut us down, but yet when it works for them, they'll close down Red Mile. Like, yeah, it's not fair.
I've got 5 horses,
Yeah.
and they're a Mustang. I'm training them, and to see the police on horses in crowds, that's a very, very dangerous thing.
Yeah.
Because no matter how well a horse is trained, there can be something that can spook them, and not only the policemen get hurt, but it can hurt other people just as bad. And I know, like in training these horses, yeah, you learn the language and you speak their language with them.
Well, and we saw the one incident in Ottawa. There was an elderly lady, I believe she was Indigenous Native American. She also fell and she was almost crushed. She could have been killed, you imagine.
Yeah, I saw that too. I was watching and saw that happen. Most of the time, a horse will try and jump over someone that's, down on the ground or whatever. But they're still, they've got 4 feet and they can't see every direction.
So we got good news on the horizon here when it comes to your father. He's now been released, but not after an easy fight. What happened there?
Well, he was granted bail after clearing multiple charges. Of course, he was placed under very strict conditions. At first, we thought it was house arrest with a curfew, which doesn't really make sense. Our lawyers were very confused about it. The judge was even confused about it for a second because you can't have house arrest and a curfew. That just doesn't make sense. But there were multiple conditions: not allowed to be in the Beltline area, participate in protests, keep the peace, be of good behavior, all that stuff. But it turns out that the Crown actually made a good decision and decided to go with curfew instead of house arrest. So from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. he has to be at home, but at least he's allowed to be out during the day. He's allowed to conduct church service on Saturdays. Still not allowed to do street church because the judge says it's an illegal activity unless they obtain a permit. But it's good news. He's home with us. He's happy to be out. Of course, he's it's still an ongoing legal battle. Sarah Miller's working our hardest to get a trial date set because it could be a year, it could be 18 months, right? We just don't know. But yeah, it's an ongoing battle.
Well, I don't watch the news. I only watch you guys. I don't watch mainstream. But when I saw that going around, I'm like, of course. Like, she's trying to blow up her own little bubble and. Oh, yeah.
That's hypocrisy in first degree.
Well, a lot of things have been very politically motivated long before this one.
Yeah. Here we're seeing it in the flesh right now, guys. We're seeing the injunction and the effects that it has not only on the peaceful protesters, but honkers, people who are just driving by. I just want to add, this is about the injunction, right? The honking.
It is.
And it's an $81 ticket, right?
That's what the province makes it as to be, yeah.
Now, I don't mean this to be offensive, but I mean, you're a very qualified guy. You guys go after gangsters, murderers, the rapists, a lot. Wouldn't you rather do that instead of just ticketing people for honking?
As you can clearly see, she wasn't ticketed.
Well, almost ticketed, right? I mean, we've seen this before. We've seen this a few times. But either way, though, isn't it like, wouldn't you prefer to go out there after those bad guys and potentially ticket people for honking?
This conversation can go for hours upon hours to give you information as to what effects a traffic stop does have for whatever reason. So at this point, I am going to cut the conversation off. But if you have any other questions, you can definitely reach our social media unit. They'll answer any other questions you may have regarding the injunction or whatever.
If I told you that somebody was out there fighting the injunction in court, how would you feel about that?
Hallelujah.
That's awesome. I hope so.
That would be good. I would wish I had the means and things that I would be taken to court too.
Why is it that the freedom protesters are the target?
Because we're fighting for freedom and we're not complying. We're shutting down their narrative, telling the truth. That's why.
Don't forget to go to protestlawsuit.com. That's where we're going to be donating to fight these guys, the City of Calgary, in court over this injunction limiting the ability of Canadians to peacefully protest, whatever it may be. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in. And don't forget, protestlawsuit.com. That's where you can go to help these guys out. For Rebel News, I'm Sidney Fazard. Protest Lawsuit is where you have to go to help these guys and other Canadians here in the City of Calgary against this injunction limiting the ability of people to peacefully protest. And don't forget, donations would provide you with a charitable tax receipt.